When Lewis Hamilton stepped out of his SF-25 after qualifying in Hungary, he didn't wait for the usual post-session debrief or data analysis. He didn't ask about tire pressures, wind gusts, or traffic on his final push lap. He simply pulled off his gloves, leaned against the pit wall, and said it out loud. "I was absolutely useless today." In a sport where every tenth of a second is often wrapped in technical justifications or political spin, Hamilton's brutal self-assessment cut through like a clean overtake into turn one. At the Hungaroring, a track he once dominated with almost casual brilliance, he had just been knocked out in Q2, position 12 on the grid. And as the cameras caught the moment, there was no shouting, no fury, just a quiet collapse of belief. The seven-time world champion, now in red, was in the midst of what may be his most psychologically challenging race weekend in over a decade. But it wasn't just the lap time. It was what it symbolized. For Hamilton, this wasn't about Hungary. It was about everything that led to this: the switch to Ferrari, the faith in a new project, and the creeping realization that belief alone can't fix fundamental flaws. Because this wasn't an isolated misstep. This was a culmination. The telemetry from qualifying told a sobering story. Through Sector 1, Hamilton was nearly 2 of 10th off his own free practice benchmark. His braking trace showed early releases at turn 5, indicative not of caution, but a lack of trust either in the front-end grip or in the stability of the rear under compression. His engineer, Riccardo Adami, tried to lift the mood over the radio, but even that fell flat. Hamilton, used to the consistent rhythm and emotional synergy of Bono at Mercedes, now sounded like a man out of sync, not just with his car, but with the system around him. And while Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur publicly backed his driver, extending his own contract just weeks earlier, even he couldn't spin the reality. Hamilton was struggling, and he knew it. Come race day, the narrative didn't improve. Hamilton lost places on the opening lap, dropping to position 14 before the field had even spread out. A short first stint on mediums left him vulnerable to undercuts from midfield runners, and the attempted recovery lacked the bite that once defined him. Verstappen swept past with DRS into turn 2, a move that wasn't just clinical, it was telling. Hamilton, boxed in on tire strategy, had no fight back, no late charge, no rain to shuffle the deck. Just position 12 at the flag, 1 lap down, no points. And for the first time in his Ferrari tenure, a finish that was forgettable. Not because it was catastrophic, but because it was irrelevant. In a season of momentum shifts and political battles, Hamilton had become background noise. And that, for a man who wants to find the front page of Formula One, may be the most painful signal of all. To understand why this Hungarian Grand Prix weekend felt so seismic, not just for Lewis Hamilton, but for Ferrari as a whole, you have to rewind to the narrative arc Ferrari had carefully been constructing all season. This wasn't meant to be a rebuilding year. With Hamilton's blockbuster signing finalized in the twilight of 2023, the message was clear. Ferrari wasn't just chasing podiums. They were hunting legacy. The SF-25 was supposed to be the canvas for that pursuit, a car born from the hard lessons of 2024's mid-season collapse and shaped by a design team emboldened by technical freedoms under the latest regulation tweaks. Early in the year, there were flashes of brilliance. Leclerc took pole in Imola. Hamilton led laps in Canada. But those flashes masked a deeper inconsistency, one that became impossible to ignore by the time the circus arrived in Budapest. Ferrari had built a car that was quick over 1 lap when the stars aligned, but brittle under pressure, unpredictable in traffic, and disturbingly sensitive to ride height, aero yaw, and track temperature. And in Hungary, those variables weren't forgiving. The heat was relentless, the track evolution steep, and the midfield fiercely compact. Teams like Aston Martin and Alpine brought aggressive updates, and the McLaren package refined since Silverstone was suddenly dominant. But what hurt most was the intra-team contrast. Charles Leclerc looked like a driver in control. Pole position on Saturday wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a public dagger through the heart of Hamilton's weekend. Same car, same conditions, same data. Yet one driver made it sing. The other couldn't make it talk. Yet, beneath the headlines and broadcast graphics, the real story was beginning to simmer. Because while Hamilton was dealing with a car that felt foreign in his hands, the whispers within the Ferrari garage grew louder. Reports began surfacing, quietly, then more boldly, about diverging setup philosophies between the two drivers. Leclerc had reportedly pushed for a stiffer rear and aggressive rake angle, favoring rotation into slow-speed corners, while Hamilton's camp pushed for stability and mechanical grip. The result? A car that increasingly looked tailored to Leclerc's driving DNA. And in a year where development tokens were tight and every millimeter of bodywork had championship consequences, Ferrari couldn't afford to split the difference. The compromise was gone. The car was drifting toward one philosophy, and it wasn't Hamilton's. The technical unraveling of Hamilton's Hungarian Grand Prix begins not with his Q2 exit, but with the subtle shifts in Ferrari's development arc over the past 3 rounds. While the headline narrative was all about Leclerc's pole and Hamilton's collapse, the more revealing story came from telemetry traces, setup sheets, and internal engineering decisions that pointed to a widening philosophical split between the two drivers. Hungary's layout, short straights, tight hairpins, and medium speed sweepers, demands a car that can rotate sharply at low speeds without sacrificing rear traction on exit. But the SF25, already known for its sensitivity under load transfer, showed its most extreme behavioral variance. Yet, when placed in Hamilton's hands, his complaints of rear instability during FP2 weren't generic gripes. They were symptomatic of a car tuned to thrive on an edge Hamilton was no longer willing to walk. Telemetry from qualifying paints a vivid contrast. Leclerc's throttle traces through Sector 2, the most technical part of the circuit, showed earlier commitment and smoother exit application through turns 8 and 9.